Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's IMC webinar. I'm Hélène, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. At IMC, the International Mentoring Center, we are passionate about empowering professionals through mentoring, leadership development, and community building. Our mission is to create transformative experiences that help individuals and organizations thrive by sharing stories, skills, and support. We believe in the power of authentic connection and learning from one another, and that's exactly what today's webinar is all about. We are very excited to welcome our speaker today, John Symes. John is a seasoned coach, a mentor, and organizational consultant with over 3 decades of experience helping leaders unlock their potential and navigate meaningful transformation. In 2000, in the UK, John founded the Mentoring Club, an innovative inter-organizational peer mentoring network that fosters cross-sector growth and leadership development. He is also the author of Realigning for Change, a practical guide to organizational change management. John's extensive experience and commitment to leadership development make him a perfect guide for today's topic. A few quick notes before we begin. The webinar will last about 60 minutes. Please feel free to use the chat and Q&A feature to send your question, and we'll time to address as many as we can at the end. And this session is being recorded and will be available for you afterwards. And now, without further delay, I'm happy to hand the virtual floor over John Symes. John, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Hélène. Thank you for that generous introduction. And hello to people joining from all over the world, wherever you are. I want to tell you about a breakfast that I had 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I'm working with the executive team, the team that support the executives in a large British company. And we're meeting, I'm going to do a day's work with the team there. And we're meeting in one of those quaint English hotels. And one of the things that quaint English hotels do really well is serve unusual breakfasts. And on the menu that morning, there was haddock. And I don't get into English hotels frequently enough, so I always order the haddock. And I sit down for breakfast. The leader of the executive team that I'm working with is sat opposite me. And when the waiter asks, we both order the haddock. The waiter comes back and puts the dish in front of each of us. And she says to me, "I've got the leg again." And in that moment, I started to try and process the phrase that she'd used, "I've got the leg again." And I started to think, oh, haddock is a fish and a fish doesn't have a leg. So she doesn't know the haddock is a fish, which probably means she hasn't traveled much in the world. Maybe she's not particularly smart. And here I am, a 25-year-old version of me, wondering what this would mean if she didn't know that haddock was a fish. What did that mean for her and her team? How did I need to change the day that I was planning? What was going to have to change because of this? And while I'm puzzling all of that out, she leans across the table and she says, "John, it always happens to me." And I said, "What?" She said, "Whenever I sit down at a large table, I bang my knee against the leg of the table." And I realized in that moment that the story I'd created about the leg of the fish had led me in completely the wrong direction. My goal today is to help you see how powerful stories can be and how important it is that we take conscious charge of those stories in order that we don't get led astray in the way I was at that breakfast rendezvous all those years ago. My name is John, and Ellen, thank you for your generous introduction. I would extract from that a couple of points which I think are relevant to the entire audience. And one is that 25 years ago, we were pioneering mentoring in a scheme where people from different organizations were mentoring each other. And back in the day, that was pre-Zoom, that was early internet. That meant people sitting together in a room, which is a fond memory. I also want to tell you that in 2006, I wrote a book called Your Planet Needs You. And this was in the middle of my life, me waking up to finding the right meaning in my life and realizing that stories are a really important way of determining our behavior. If we can inculcate the story that our planet needs us, it gives us a different response to the ails of this moment in history. And so my life has been entwined with transformation and mentoring as a vehicle for transformation and with story change for many years now. So I'm delighted to be here talking about how we can free ourselves from the stories that limit us. That's a little about me. I would love to know who is in the room here. And I'm inviting you, if you would please, to drop into the chat your name and where you're from. And then perhaps would you let me know if you're listening today as a mentor, somebody that's already mentoring other people, whether you're somebody looking for a mentor, whether you're an HR professional in charge of mentoring inside your organization, or perhaps you identify as a leader. And what I want to do is I want to make my remarks relevant to each of those perspectives as we go through today. So would you please drop that in the chat? And then, Hélène, if you'd be kind enough to summarize that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
So we have Abdeladem from Morocco. We have Carolina, who is a consultant, a coach, and a trainer. So far, this is what we have in the panel. So
okay.
please guys, share where you are from. Okay, we have. So Abdeladem is a mentee and the PMO leader mentoring from the PMO leader mentoring program. Okay.
All right. Well, let's leave a moment for those responses to come in. Thank
Yes.
you. I can see them arriving now. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to drop into the presentation. And so I'm going to share my screen. And okay, so here we are. Stories into Strength, how to use narrative liberation. Um, and I've got that strange problem where the slides won't move. How bizarre. Um, Forgive me just a moment. Oh, yikes. Forgive me, friends. The setup here is just, there we go. Alrighty. So stories, narratives are the water that we swim in. And as Jung said, we don't see the story. One of the key things about narratives that I want to impress upon you is that they live in an invisible world and are unconscious to us. Most of the stories that shape our behavior and our belief are in fact unconscious to us, which means they're affecting our behavior without us knowing it. And in order to demonstrate the power of this, let's just watch this short video. There's no sound to this, I'm afraid, but I think you'll get the point quite quickly.
Can you please share your screen again, John? Because we can't see your screen at the moment.
Oh, I beg your pardon. What were you seeing instead?
Just you.
Oh, gosh. Okay, do we see it now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. So let's. Okay, so what that short video demonstrates to us perfectly is how we have made stories about what we see in the video, and then gently the presenter he removes each of those stories by showing us that our eye has been deceived. Very often it's our thinking that's been deceived, like my breakfast story. There were words there that caused me to pick up a story. In this case, it's images that have us pick up a story. And what I hope that demonstrates is how easily we fall into making story about that which we see. Now, I'm not here to tell you that all stories are bad. There are very powerful stories, stories that empower us, enable us, that help us see possibility. And if you're working as a mentor, even as a leader, your job actually can be to create stories that allow people to perform to the best of their abilities, to combine in amazing ways, and to produce impacts that are really valuable for your business, for your organization. So we want to find stories that empower us. The stories that I'm going to talk more about today are the stories that limit us. And so we do have a way in which stories can help us live in a world which is gives us less choice. And so we make sense of the world through our stories, but when we've made sense of the stories in ways which don't serve us, I'm back at the breakfast table with the haddock. When those stories don't serve us, we're being led astray. We're making choices without the full information that we might otherwise have. These stories, particularly these limiting stories, they're going to affect how we see the world, the way we make judgments about the world that we're in. And then they're also going to affect the way we see ourselves and our sense of ourselves. And then the third dimension of this is they affect the way we see and we assess. And then sometimes we start to judge other people. So stories are both positive and negative, and we're going to look at how we don't fall prey to the unconscious impact of stories. And so, this presentation doesn't want to. There we go. So, my question to you all an audience is: what story do you find yourself repeating? It might be a story about yourself. It might be a story about the job that you're doing. It could even be a story about the organization you work for. And once again, I'd love it if you find the story that's repeating itself in your thinking, drop that in the chat so that we have a sense of how this lands with you. Um, okay, let's talk about common limiting stories. The imposter syndrome is probably the most well known of the stories that limit us. And how many of us have got some version of the story, I don't belong here, which is the imposter syndrome. And when we step into a meeting, when we come into a room, when we're in a conversation, and we're already doubting our relevance to the conversation or our right to be in that room, then of course we're not going to bring our fullest self. So we're listening out for the imposter syndrome. But we also know there are other stories that we can be listening for. And I've heard this story, I can't show any weakness, particularly for people in high profile leadership positions. Some of us carry around the story that responsibility is a burden. And when we do that, of course, we're working from a place of being burdened. I have a technique that I use when I'm working with teams. I call it the silent organization chart. And what I'll do is I'll ask a team of people to create a physical representation in the room, in the space we're working in. I'll say, make a physical representation of the way you interrelate as you work. And I ask them to do it in silence. And so, over about 5 minutes, you have this very interesting process as people look at each other and try to work out how, in physical space, they're going to represent their connections to their peers, to their reports, to the people they work for, to different departments. And what we do when they've made that human sculpture is we debrief it. We ask the questions, why are you doing that? I had a particular example. I was working with a leadership team from an American company in Virginia, and I briefed that exercise, and immediately two people took actions that really surprised me. First of all, the leader of that team immediately lay down on the floor on his back in the middle of everybody else. And of course, nobody's speaking, so he just lies down on the floor. One of his teammates picked up a chair, walked out of the room, and sat down in the corridor. Now, for me, I don't know why he lay on the floor. I don't know why he's in the corridor, but I've got questions to ask. I've got the ability to say, okay, so what's the story you're telling yourself that the most appropriate place for you as a leader is lying on the floor? And what story is causing you to take yourself out of the room entirely? And so we're surfacing there the stories that people are telling themselves that are very clearly affecting their behavior. So let's look from what some of these stories are. Let's talk about the cost of these stories. And I'm going to say that these stories always ensure that we are taking choices and decisions from without having access to a full range of the information that we need because we're filtering out some of that information. So we're going to see stunted leadership, stifled innovation, superficial mentoring, and we're going to see a culture which prioritizes productivity at the expense of humanity. And my question to you with the story that I asked you earlier, what stories are you repeating? What is the cost to you of any stories that you're running? I'm very interested to know that. Recognizing the cost of the stories becomes one of our incentives or one of the primary movers in us learning how to shift those stories. So, how's this relevant to mentoring? That's what you're probably asking, and let's have a look at that now. What is mentoring? And I know Ellen and the IMC have a definition of mentoring. The definition that I tend to use is that mentoring is about supporting somebody's evolution. It's about helping in the process of learning and transformation so that, yes, it will allow somebody to play a fuller role in an organization. That's how I think of mentoring. I think of it as one of the learning and development interventions that we can use. I say that mentors are about supporting evolution of individuals. They have the capacity to influence identity and mindset. And I do believe that mentoring centers on story. But let's look at this in a different way as well. Here's what I call the spectrum of interventions. And we start on the left with the process of telling somebody what to do. It's a very directive way of provoking action. And then the spectrum takes us through teaching and coaching and all the way to the right-hand side and mentoring. With mentoring, we're not going to tell anybody what to do. What we're doing is building relationships. And what we're interested in, if you look at the fourth line down, we're interested in sharing wisdom, helping somebody evolve their identity, and helping them to shift the stories that they live in. Our job as mentors is about the long-term growth and the sense of identity of the person that we're mentoring. And you'll see on that spectrum that we move from directive action through instruction when we're teaching. With coaching, we're supporting people. In mentoring, we're mostly paying attention to the relationship. We're not trying to impart skills. We're not trying to up level somebody's knowledge. We might help them learn how they can do that themselves. But with mentoring, we're really about building a relationship and helping somebody in their sense of who they be. Long-term growth and identity, those are perhaps the key words on that slide. And so I also say that mentors have the capacity to use coaching skills and teaching skills where they need to, but that's perhaps advanced level mentoring. So this is why I think narrative liberation is important for mentors, because we're in the business of helping people transform their sense of themselves. So I would say that mentoring is actually the business of helping people step into larger stories, free themselves from the stories that don't work and step into larger stories. If you think about a mentor that you've worked with over time, I bet she or he has been able to help you see the world differently, help you see that there are more expansive ways of being. There are more successful ways of playing the role that you play. And so I think mentoring is all about narrative liberation. And I think our role as mentors is to help people to, yes, find out where these stories are, mirror truth back to people, hold space for them to discover more about themselves, and yes, midwife new, powerful, enabling stories. That's what we're up to as mentors. Okay, let's talk a little bit about where these stories come from. And I've got a lot of information to go through. I want to let you know that there's also some extra information that I'm going to make available at the end of the presentation, and there's a Q&A session. So if I'm saying anything that deserves further examination, make a note of it and we'll come back to it in the Q&A. So the origin of limiting stories. Let's talk about these four places where most of these limiting stories come from. The first is the conditioning that we get, usually when we're very young, often from mum and dad or teachers, key family members. And our conditioning is going to set the tone for the way we think. Who of us as adults doesn't sometimes hear themselves with their parents' voice echoing in their heads? I know that's true for me, and I think most everybody I've ever asked that question to. Most of us in our upbringing learn some version of I am not deserving, or I am not worthy, or I am not wanted. And sad to say, we spend our adult years trying to unlearn that and rediscover the worth that we have and the capacity that we have. That's the journey of life. But you would know that every person you encounter in a mentoring relationship or business relationship has come through their childhood, which has them doubt themselves to some degree. That's where a lot of our stories come from. The culture is replete with stories, and particularly in the realm of leadership. And I live in the USA where, if there's a successful sports coach, his or her words become the guiding principles. And so, we have a culture which says things like, no pain, no gain. If you want it done right, do it yourself to make sure you get the details right. Failure is not an option, we say. Winners never quit. And so we swim in the waters of these aphorisms which tell us how things are. And some of that becomes our orientation. Professional and corporate environments are rife with their own particular limiting stories. I remember well, I used to work for Nestle, the Swiss food company, and their headquarters is in Lausanne, just outside Lausanne, with a view over Lac Leman near Geneva. And I was there on the. It's a modest sixth-floor building. The sixth floor has a lovely view over the lake, and I was there meeting with the person responsible for innovation inside of Nestle. And he drew me to the window and to this gorgeous view of the lake and then the Alps on the other side of the lake. And he said to me, John, he said, and he pointed down a part of the lake near us. He said, that's where the bodies are. And I said, what? He said, that's where the bodies are. What bodies? He said, that's where anybody who ever tried to innovate in Nestle is now. And so what you get from that is a story that this huge organization, this enormous organization, which probably operates in every single country in the world, in those days, and it's 20 years ago, had a culture in which innovation was so dangerous that it would end your career. And so we need to know this. We need to recognize this. We need to find these stories and disempower them. Most of you will recognize the fourth point on this list because we've all known some kind of failure and pain. And very often from that, we learn what we think of as life's lessons. And we decide that we're never going to risk it again. I'm not going to trust people again. I'm not going to invest my heart in a situation I can't control. Those are actually some of my own lessons from failure and pain in my life. And we find that these points of failure, these points where we're suffering, are often points where we crystallize a perspective and it becomes a guiding, often limiting story. So that's where stories come from, and then they get organized in our thinking as in a couple of ways. Let's illustrate that. Which of you has a set of rules that you live by? I bet most of us do. And the rules that we live by are usually ways of making sure our stories stay intact. So I always double check the work that is provided to me by that person. It's a rule I've made up. It's based on a story that if I don't, it's going to turn out badly for me. So we create rules. We make assumptions. My assumption about the dear woman who ordered haddock was that she was somehow naive or not smart. Completely false assumption that I'd made. And the other thing that our stories give us is biases. Who of us can say that they are completely without bias about people who are, particularly about people who are different from us? People who are different in any of the lines of difference, be it gender or skin color or religious identity or country of origin, any of the lines of difference give us the potential to have bias because we make stories up about the people who aren't like us. And so the stories come from these places and they live in us as rules and assumptions and biases. How is this going to affect us if we're a mentor of other people? So if we're a mentor to others, we need to understand that they come along with their own stories and see that part of our job is to help them shake free of the limiting stories and adopt some more enabling and empowering stories. If we ourselves are leaders, I invite you to think that you are, as a leader, creating stories that other people live in. You have a chance to make sure the stories they live in are not stories about dead bodies in lakes, but they're stories about people who are expressing themselves fully and bringing their full potential to work. As leaders, you might be listening and saying, well, what are the stories that are running me? If I were to look in the dark, invisible place, what are the stories that are running my life at the moment? We can all be listening for that. If you're in a position of being mentored by other people, be prepared to go into this space of story. If you're listening as an HR professional, I encourage you to think how you would weave this kind of awareness and this kind of mentoring into the programs that you're sponsoring within your organization. Okay, let's move on and look at how we're actually going to enact narrative liberation. So if we spot that somebody has a story how are we going to help free them from it? So, narrative liberation, becoming aware of, unhooking from, and rewriting unconscious stories. Let me tell you about Aaron. Aaron's a guy I was mentoring recently, and he came to me with a problem. The problem he had that was that he was stuck. Aaron was stuck. His symptoms were anxiety, some depression, overwork, a whole lot of worry about, particularly about high profile meetings. He was overworking to the point of exhaustion, and his life outside of work was suffering. And he was being mentored by me because his performance wasn't up to the standard that was expected. So the first thing that I do is sit and talk to Aaron, and we explore what is the box that he's stuck in. And I need to understand what it is that's preventing him from displaying his full attributes in his work. Because when I meet with him, I'm meeting a witty, creative, really fun guy. And then he tells me stories about work, and this guy disappears, and in comes this rather anxious, hardworking, self-doubting person. So I have to discover with him what's the story that he's living in. And the story he's living in is that his boss actually both doesn't like him and doesn't really value him. That's a very tough story to live within. And so we talk about that, and what we need to do is we need to unhook that story. So I'm going to start asking him questions at this point and say, well, how is it you've come to this conclusion? I'm going to ask him to evaluate or reevaluate the evidence. And with a few questions and some probing and tasking him to get into conversation with that boss, we're able to loosen up the grip of that story. And Aaron starts to see, well, maybe he doesn't think I'm incompetent. He maybe it's not, maybe he actually does like me. And we've created the space for this story to get loosened and freed up. Then we want to help him to find a more powerful story to live within. And this next step helps to complete the second step of unhooking the story. So the next step is to write a new story, rewrite the story that he's working in. And what we don't want to do necessarily is just reverse the story that says, well, my boss doesn't like me and he doesn't think I'm competent. We don't want to just reverse that story. We want to find a more powerful story. Aaron finds the story that he wants to live in is, I've got a lot to contribute here in this organization, and I have the skills to do it. And so that's exactly what he decides he's going to live from. And so we start looking for evidence to support this new story. Well, let's look at all the places where you do have a lot to offer. What are the skills that you bring? What's the experience that you've got? What's your contribution been? And we begin to build a body of evidence that says, yes, I have a lot to contribute and skills to bring it. And then I task him with taking that back to the workplace in the normal meetings that he's engaged in and putting it into action. And so we've worked with Aaron all the way from the stuck in this fear that his boss doesn't like him, all the way through to seeing himself as somebody with a lot to bring and the skills to bring it. And when that shift took about 15 to 18 months. And when that shift was complete, he was winning more responsibility within the organization. He was being trusted to take on projects that wouldn't have come to him previously. He'd regained a sense of confidence, certainly, and even some justifiable pride in what he was able to achieve. Those four steps are the steps that I'm going to encourage you to take with the people that you're working with or in your own thinking. Okay, that's narrative liberation. Let's look and see in a bit more detail, how we're going to go about doing this. And I want to offer each of you the three tools that I'm going to talk about right now. I'm offering as well a download which has got some more information in it as well. But let's look at three tools that you can use right away as a mentor with the people that you're mentoring, and as an individual, questions or tools you can use for yourself. Here we go. Okay, the first of the tools that I want to talk about is the old story, new story frame. And imagine with Aaron, we could say that the old story was this disempowered story. Once he's begun the process of writing a new story, we can refer to the new story. And I literally mean refer to Aaron, you're living in the old story, or are you living in a new story? That's what I'm literally going to say that to him. And I'm going to use the labels old story and new story to evoke two very different states of being. If I say, Aaron, you're living in the old story, it's because I see that he's anxious and worried and not trusting his own capacities and his own opinions. If I say, Aaron, you've got to operate from the new story, his shoulders go back, he straightens up, he's got more pride in himself, more respect for his own experience and knowledge, and he operates in a completely different way. Just that framing makes all that difference. The other thing I'm going to invite you to do in the second point here is to timeline the story. So when we find somebody stuck inside a story, I'm with the man from Nestle, and he says innovation dies in the lake. I said, well, tell me, how long's that been the case? When did that story start? Well, it started back in the day when we tried to launch a whole new division to take us into frozen foods, and it was a complete failure. And all the people that were responsible, he tells me when that story originated within Nestle. He said, well, what's reinforced the story over time? And what's lessened the grip of the story? So what I'm explaining, I think, is that if we follow the timeline of the story, we can see how it's arisen and how it might be changed. The third point here, listening for clues. I want to give you a few different linguistic clues that somebody's talking to you from a story. Let's start with time freeze. When people say two words, always and never, it's very, very likely that they're speaking about a rule that they've got in their life that's based on a story. Very few things always happen, but when we say, I always get this wrong, or my boss is never going to listen to me, that doesn't mean he or she isn't ever going to listen. But it does mean I'm probably not going to ask them to listen because I'm operating from the sense of never. So time freeze is one way in which we can hear that people are speaking from stories. We also have absolutes and generalizations. Everything they do in marketing, it just it doesn't work. Production always let us down. We make generalizations about entire groups of people, often other departments, sometimes our customers, sometimes the leadership of the company. We make these generalizations and then we act as if they're true. And so we want to be listening for times when we do that. Stories also help us surrender our agency. Sometimes we hear people who will frequently, repeatedly blame other people when things don't go the way they want. And when people are repeatedly blaming or putting responsibility somewhere else, lacking agency, it's usually because they live in a story in which they don't have that agency. So when somebody says, we had a bad quarter, what they may well be doing is reflecting on all the external circumstances in which the business didn't perform the way you wanted. if they were fully in agency, they might more accurately say, we weren't able to hit our targets in the quarter. There's a big difference between how empowered somebody is in those two different worlds. So listen out for the clues that you or the person you're mentoring is surrendering your agency. And then beware of the stories that run in organizations. Yes, if you're working with Nestle, beware when somebody casts doubt on your innovative idea because you know there's a script in that organization that might hold and this is historic, so I don't want to diss Nestle today, but it could well be there's a cultural script that is being repeated through this person. So those are some of the ways that we spot when stories are being used. And then we want to hold space for people to find their stories. I don't know if in your training as mentors, I'm not sure how you were trained, how you learned to be a mentor. But let's just say that the place we want to be as mentors is to be curious. We're not there to tell other people, we're there to find out how they think, what they experience. And only when we've done that can we actually help open up new possibilities for them. We want to be curious and spacious. We want to make a space in which it's safe for people to explore, reflect on their inner world and share it with us. So we're curious and spacious and open-minded. We want to be receptive to ideas that come from all sorts of places. We're not there because we're the smartest person in the room. We're there because we have a capacity to help other people think differently. And so we want to be curious and spacious and open-minded. And last of all, we want to trust the genius, the human capacity inside the person that we're working with, and know that given the right amount of curiosity and spaciousness and open-mindedness from us, they will be able to surface what's truest for them. They will be the author of their own next story, far better than you. You might help inspire it, but we're really trying to bring out the genius of the contribution of the truth of the person that we're mentoring so they can apply that. Okay, that's what I've got to say about narrative liberation in mentoring right now. I want to just draw some conclusions, and we're going to move towards the Q&A moment. But what have we found? We found that we swim in invisible and unconscious stories. They're all around us. They cause us to doubt people when they knock their leg on a dining table. They shape our behavior. When these stories take hold, they shape our behavior in good ways, often in ways that are very limiting. The business of mentoring is the business of narrative liberation. I really want you to see that. And I want you to know that limiting stories can be changed and that new stories create new possibilities. New stories, the best news stories are those that help us reach deep into our soul. And the famous story about the mission to get a man on the moon in the USA, not the moon in the USA, the mission in the USA to get a man on the moon during the 60s. And you've probably all heard the story about the person that was actually sweeping the floor inside one of the NASA buildings, and he was asked, what are you doing? And expecting that the answer would be, I'm sweeping the floor. But the answer that he provided was, I'm helping put a man on the moon as he's sweeping. When we as leaders can create stories that powerful that people can connect their own, sometimes mundane activity to lofty and inspiring goals, we're really using story in the very best way. I'm going to take questions in a moment. I want to leave you with a way of getting hold of me. Should you want more information from that QR code, I should step out of the way of it so that you can catch the QR code. That'll take you to a page on my website where there are a couple of different downloads for you. One, some more detail about the skills of narrative liberation and mentoring. And the other is a piece that you might like for leaders to look at how stories might be limiting them in their own world. Please feel free to get in touch. Delighted to chat. And let's use the next few minutes to answer any questions you've got. If there are questions that run beyond that, I'm very happy for you to contact me in any of the ways that you can see there on the screen. So, um, my final urging to you would be to really start paying attention to the way stories show up in your life, whether you're working as a mentor or as a leader. Start listening for, start seeing, start understanding the stories that are affecting your life. It can open up a whole new vista for you. Okay,
Thank
let's go
you.
back into
Thank you
the
so much, Don, for that inspiring, insightful presentation. Now we would like to open the floor to questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box. Let's do that now. And we'll try to do our best to get as many as possible today. So we have a question from Jania, who is asking if the slides will be available after the presentation.
Absolutely. And you have a record. What do you make available afterwards, Ellen?
So we'll put the video on the website. So the video will be accessible on the website.
And I'll happily share the slides with anybody there. They're not on that download page, but they can be. And please just email me and I'll send them.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Any
yeah.
other questions, guys? Don't be shy and share your questions.
I'd love to hear from anybody in the audience that's mentoring that has questions about how best they can approach mentoring now with this information. What can we talk about that will help?
So we have a question for Abdeladem. How to facilitate the transition to the new story?
How to facilitate the transition to a new story? Well, let's go back to the example of Aaron, the guy that I was coaching. There is a period in which um, we've recognized an old story and we're loosening its grip. But stories operate, I want to say, a little bit like the operating system on a computer or a device of some kind. That if we're not, if we don't need to pay attention to the story for it to be in action. So when we recognize a story that we want to disable, there's going to be a period of time when we know it's there and we're trying to overcome it. The story that I remember being told years ago was that it's like when we know there's a pothole in the road. We've been walking down the street and falling into a pothole in the road. And then somebody tells us there's a pothole in the road. The very next day, because we walk down the street every day, the very next day we walk down the street and lo and behold, we fall in the pothole. And it's the pothole that somebody told us about the day before. And the day after that, we walk down the street and we fall into the pothole again. And we knew it was there, but we still fell into it. And it's a couple of days before we actually learn that when we walk down that street, we can anticipate the pothole and that we're not going to fall into it, we're going to step around it. And it's a little bit like that with these stories that we're disabling. So that once Aaron recognized that he'd got a story that his boss didn't like him and didn't respect him, he knew that cognitively, but that story is still inside him affecting his behavior. So to answer your question, we need to have grace and patience as we loosen the grip of these old stories and simultaneously be erecting the new stories that are going to take their place. And we want to erect new stories that almost that are more powerful than the story that they're disabling. So his new story that I've got lots to offer and all the skills to bring it. Again, that's going to take a while to birth. In one of my slides, I said you're the midwife of new stories. It takes a while for that story to take hold and begin to affect our behavior. So the answer is with patience, we're going to tend to somebody while there's a story that's dying and a new story being born. That's the most effective way I can answer that question right now.
Thank you,
Yeah.
John. We have another question from Al Chan. An interesting concept of narrative liberation. Does it mean practicing a laissez-faire leadership of mentoring?
Laissez-faire, is it laissez-faire? Gosh, what a good question. Is narrative liberation laissez-faire? I don't think it's laissez-faire at all. And I'm interested that you came to that conclusion. If you want to say any more in the chat about how you came to that conclusion, there's an interesting story in that, I think. It's not about being laissez-faire at all. So, again, let's talk about that case study with Aaron. There was nothing laissez-faire about my approach. I was actually not laissez-faire, laser focused on helping him identify what was keeping him stuck in a box that is that served nobody at all. And I was absolutely rigorous in helping him identify the limiting story. So no, there's nothing laissez-faire or permissive about the approach. It actually is it's a very targeted approach. Yeah. And so if you've got more information to provide about that, please do. But otherwise, I'm not suggesting it's about laissez-faire at all. I think a good mentor has an agenda for the person that they're mentoring. That agenda is set by the person they're mentoring. But then we as the mentor, we hold on to that and say, you're employing me as a mentor because you want to get to this place, this way of being, this way of operating, this level of capability or this promotion, whatever it might be. That's the legitimate focus of our efforts. And as a mentor, I take that very seriously.
Okay, thank you, John. Any other questions, guys? Otherwise, we are not far from wrapping up the session. Ah, I think Ash
Well,
is raising hand. Okay. Sorry, I have a question from Abdeladem now.
uh-huh.
How to swim in invisible and be prepared to the new story?
Great. Thank you for that question. Well, we're swimming in the invisible anyhow. We live in a world of stories, so the thing we can do is be aware of the stories themselves. Now, let's think about how we consume news and current affairs. I was born in the UK. The BBC used to be a trusted brand around the world, and we lived in the belief that if the BBC told you, then it must be true. I had a Latin teacher when I was 14 years old, and I can still remember him. And he said to me, he was a slightly pompous man, and I can see him sitting there. And he said to me, he said, Symes, don't believe everything you read in the papers. He said, even I can be wrong sometimes. And those words have helped to shape my curiosity for my entire life. I tend to look and try and see who's telling me the story and where's that information coming from? And can it be relied upon? Is the person telling me the story? Do they have a perspective? Do they stand to gain something from the story? So, how to swim in the invisible is to actually try to make it as visible as possible. Try and understand what are the stories that are affecting you and how are they influencing your behavior? And then how to be prepared for new stories. What a great question. I think that's the work of a lifetime in a certain way. And I don't mean that as a platitude. To be prepared for new stories is to have um, the emotional flexibility to actually be able to adapt. It's about embracing differences and change. And those are easy words, but that's it's a difficult way to walk in life because one of the things stories do is they give us comfort. They help us, they give us the sense that we can make meaning in the world. So, what a great question. I hope those answers have helped. Yeah, and I'm here for any other questions.
Yes,
And
Sorry, John. I think Archan is trying to raise hand, so I'm going to allow talking.
Yeah,
Can you
yeah,
please?
yeah.
Yes.
Hi, how are you, John? I'm from Malaysia. So basically, my
Hi.
question is, I asked about the laissez-faire. It's because sometimes the mentor they cannot give the full direction. For example, like a 100-meter Olympian. So in order to achieve the under 10 seconds, he couldn't give the full. I mean, he has to push the mentee or something, or the somebody he's coaching to make sure that he goes below the 10-second mark. But each time
Right.
the guys cannot make the mark to go below the 10 second. So would he? How do you actually push him towards to getting that more? Getting more physical stamina in place, getting him a better diet, lowering the I mean, so that he can live faster and going across the finishing line at a faster pace. And how
Uh,
does that go about? Maybe you can elaborate more. Thanks, John.
yeah, let me thank you. Thank you for the clarification. I love it. As a mentor, you can never want your mentee's goal more than them. I want to say that. If you find that you are more enthusiastic for that guy to run less than 10 seconds for the 100 meters than he or she is, then something's wrong. What I'm saying is that our job as a mentor is to create a world in which that runner is so committed to breaking 10 seconds that they will do the training, but they'll ask about nutrition. They'll look at how their rest protocol is. They'll start looking at equipment. They'll start looking at every facet that affects how fast they run because you've helped them get so motivated and committed to that goal that nothing will get in their way. And I know you can't run 100 meters in less than 10 seconds. I know you can't. But you can help somebody to do that by helping them find a story in which they become an unstoppable desire to do that. Nothing laissez faire about that. That's all very purposeful. Does that make sense?
Yep, definitely. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, John. We have a question from Rabia asking, can a mentor's limiting story affect the mentee's narrative?
Yes. Yes. Lovely. Absolutely. If I'm mentoring somebody and I'm mentoring, let's continue with the case study of Aaron. He's sitting in the story that his boss doesn't like him and doesn't think he's competent. If I bring a sense as a mentor that I don't think you're competent, Aaron, then that's completely destroying the relationship. That's limiting the relationship because I bought into the story that Aaron's already inside of. Um, I'm going to very often find that I'm very often going to find that my own stories come up. I'm not sure who's asking the question, but if you're an experienced coach or mentor, you'll know that very often issues that you're working on yourself, your own limitations, reflect themselves in the people that you're coaching very often. And it provides us with an opportunity to break from those stories ourselves. It's important for us to see how our own stories are entwined with the stories, the lives, the questions, the process that we're in with the people we're mentoring and coaching. Yeah, great question. Thank you.
Good, good. Thank you so much, John. If we didn't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to John or to the IMC directly. I think we are not far from wrapping up. Before we close, I want to highlight how valuable is it to learn from John's experience and how mentoring and leadership can unlock transformation through storytelling and organizational change. Remember, the tools and insights John shared today are not just concepts, they are practical approaches you can apply in your own leadership journey and mentoring relationships. Thank you again, John, for sharing your expertise with us today. It was truly enriching. And thank you to everyone who joined us. We hope you found this session meaningful and inspiring. This webinar was recorded and will be available to you shortly. We'll send the link by email. Please keep an eye on for upcoming IMC events and webinars. And if you would like to learn more and get involved, visit mentoringcenter.org. I'm wishing you all the best as you continue your leadership and mentoring journeys, and have a wonderful rest of your day and take care. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you, John. Bye-bye.